Well, that was a change of plans. Hello, everybody. It's I, Flamingo Writer here, back again for another video, and yeah, I need to discuss something with you guys. You may have noticed that in the last video, I said, wish me well not to puke. And there's a reason for that. See, the reason being is because there was supposed to be a video that I was originally going to talk about for the month of October. In this case, yeah, this was due to a number of reasons why I decided not to talk about pupa in of itself. Despite that, however, though, I have my reasons why I'm not talking about pupa, so here it goes. While I have seen every episode of pupa in less than an hour, seriously, it doesn't take that long to watch this here entire series. It's only about, what, 4 minutes per episode, or a total of 12 episodes? Yeah, you're not really missing much. And during that time period, I started realizing something. Namely, that if I did talk about pupa, I wouldn't have that much to say on it. So why do I bring that up? Well, it's because I personally thought I would have more to offer when it comes to pupa in of itself, but here's the thing. My stomach is weak compared to a lot of other people out there, though. Yeah, my stomach is just as weak as how Hercules gave away his strength when he gave it to Hades, if you remember, though. If I had to guess why I'm not doing this, though, it's probably because of the amount of gross things they had in here. Despite being disturbing, though, the writing itself was even bad than I thought I realized, though. And that's not even getting to the point where the series itself has a lot of incest and cannibalism. So if you ever do want to watch that series for yourself, though, I probably would recommend watching with caution if you can get behind all of that. But there are better videos out there that can do that video justice. So if you ever want to see pupa in of itself, be my guest. However, with that said, we're going to go into the subject at hand. In this case, magical girl shows. Yeah, I know I said before I'm going to take a break from the magical girl podcast, but come on now. I really feel like the dark magical girl genre really needs its place as well, though. If I can talk about magical girl shows, then I'll be damned I can talk about that genre for this video. So as such, vampires. Whether you find vampires interesting or not, I always find them quite fascinating to see, though. But there are times when even I'll admit, despite what some people might tell you, vampires seem to get a bad rep, especially when it comes to media these days. One of the biggest examples has to be Twilight. I mean, come on now. This here franchise in itself is so bad that I remember reading the book and watching the movie when I was a kid, and I think that's enough to tell you how much those things in themselves put me to sleep. To say nothing else, though, this is one case where I really felt like they really had something to it, though. And I was only 9 or 10 when I first saw this here shit. Like, seriously, though, I could not tell you how much this here franchise in itself really had fascinated me in a bad way, though. All that, though, I don't want to say that vampires are really a bad creature itself, though. But it really depends on what you're looking for. It also doesn't help the fact that they seem to have almost a bad rep when it comes to anime. Now, there are exceptions. For what it's worth, though, I have seen good anime with vampires in it, though. But even with that said, there are some other stuff besides anime, especially an animated series like Mode of the Vampire. Yeah, this was how I got fascinated with vampires, if it wasn't obvious from my 13-year-old phase. And I didn't even grow up with this show entirely, though. I've only seen a few episodes in itself, though. But if you want to watch it for yourself, you can find it pretty easily online, though. It's a very fascinating Canadian kids show. But no, I'm talking about anime as in they really seem to get a bad rep. Mostly when it comes to shoujo. I'm not referring to Rosario the Vampire since that's shonen, but when it comes to shoujo, well, that can be a double-edged sword. Ouch. One of the biggest examples people come to mind is sometimes Vampire Knight, but, well, if you've seen Vampire Knight, unlike me, even though I wanted to watch it though, then you would know how much a lot of people made fun of the fact that it's basically Twilight, just with an anime wrinkle to it. Yeah, I think you guys already know how I feel about that. Despite that, however, I was kind of disappointed because from what I've heard, it did seem like it was kind of intriguing, though, but apparently not. I would watch it on Netflix, considering it's there for how long they wanted to do it on Netflix, but still. Anyways, instead of Vampire Knight, I thought maybe Dialogue Lovers would give me a chance. But no. Seriously, though, the most I can tell you of that is that it's the same thing like that Die Hard series Vampire Knight, but unfortunately it's kind of like that series except with a much more ineffectual lead and what's worse, more male to fight over the female lead, though. What is it with reverse harems doing that? Can't they be something that we can at least tolerate, though? But none of those are the ones I'm talking about today. Instead of talking about a romance, though, I decided to find a series for myself that was recommended to me by YouTube, which I'll get to later in this video. In this case, I'm referring to is the series that we're looking at today, Vampire Princess Miyu. Vampire Princess Miyu started out as a shoujo manga written by Narumi Kanuchi and illustrated by Toshiki Hirono, a husband and wife duo that created the series for a long time already. To say nothing else, though, the series itself has been around for quite a long time by shoujo standards, ever since the mid to late 1980s, and as well as ending in 2002. So for about a few decades, though, this here series actually does seem like it had right up the resume sleeve, but not entirely, though. But this is one of the weirdest entries, though. Usually when it comes to anime, though, they wait until all this series is over to do the OVAs and then the anime, but no, this time it's actually vice versa, where the OVAs came out first, and then after that the anime, which I'm not so sure how they do that, though. Usually when OVAs start out, though, they normally just do it after the series is over, but I guess they didn't think it would go that far. But the only way some people have known about these OVAs is probably from VHS collections, which I really didn't have this here series growing up, though, but part of me does feel like I would have watched it when I was younger, despite not being a fan of horror a lot of times, though. I still have a few horror favorites here and there, though, but this is what here where I say that the OVAs themselves are really not that bad if you ever get to see them for yourself, though. But of course, we're not here to talk about the OVAs, but rather its anime adaptation, which lasted for 26 episodes. Yeah, unfortunately, this is one of those cases where it seems like a lot of shoujo vampire series last for 26 episodes. The same thing happened to Vampire Knight and Diabolic Lovers, but those came out even after this year's series came out, but almost very many people have talked about it, though. There are some people who may have talked about this, mostly old school otaku anime reviewers out there if you've been around there longer than I have. But aside from that, though, the most I've seen of it were mostly from audience members who have seen the series in comment sections. So you can definitely bet why that is, though. I think the only shoujo vampire series I can think of at the top of my head would have to be Tokamiki Tonight, because at least there it lasted for 35 episodes, but here's 10 episodes. And it's actually 9 or 10 episodes less, so it's not like you're gonna hear anything else besides that, though. But for better or for worse, let's suck the blood out of her victims as we delve into the series Vampire Princess Miyu. I will say, once we get into the series, though, I think it's only fitting if we talk about the background of this year's series first. While the series itself did air into VHS compilations for us in the West to actually get to it, though, this is one case where the series itself seemed to have a little more to it than itself, though. While there were some VHS compilations to get the entire series itself, though, it's more like, say, you had to go through chapters in order to find this here series itself, though. Doesn't help the fact that this here series, while it's not really lost media per se, it does feel pretty obscure, though. But unlike a certain other series I've talked about, like Cosplayers, at least this one seems to be more like a buried time capsule than ever before, though. Just to give you guys a full awareness of that, though. The anime was animated by a studio called AIC, and I'm not so sure how many things I've seen from this year company alone, because I have heard of their company before, but either I overlooked it when watching some of their stuff, or I just I thought I'd bring that up in case you're wondering where it is, though. But aside from that, though, you can find this year's series on YouTube if you look hard enough, though. They have both the English and the Japanese dubs, but I'll cross that London Bridge when we get to it, though. Just tell you guys what I feel about it, though. But for right now, what's the series about? The series itself focuses around our main heroine, Miyu, a seemingly ordinary teenage girl, but she actually turns out to be a vampire herself, though, who is also the guardian of both the human and the demon worlds. While hunting them down to banish these here demons known as Shinma, she banishes them to the darkness to seal them away, though, all while trying to choose carefully about the victims she has in order to suck the blood out of them, because, well, vampire. And as you can probably guess, though, she herself, though, has to do whatever she can in order her to keep him from happening, though, while she escapes from dimension in order to hunt down these here demons, though. To say nothing else, though, the series itself focuses around the sad and creepy atmosphere of life, death, and even the nature of humanity, while subverts around the vampire myths. While Miyu herself is still trying to keep itself herself a secret, though, from everyone else, though, she does whatever she can in order to secure her dual life. But there's also the fact that she also has her companions with her. Along the way comes across her one companion, Larva. Okay, I'm not trying to make fun, but I get that Japan has a weird way of naming their characters, but who in their right mind would name a character Larva? That's like the equivalent of calling someone, wait a second. And then there's also the other character that I... Shinma, or Shina? Yeah, somehow these names are so similar, it's hard to tell them apart, can you tell? And as the series goes on, though, Miyu starts learning more and more about these here vampires and demons, of why they're coming to the human world, while she still seals them away. Yeah, you might be thinking to yourself, though, after all of that, though, so how did Miyu become this ordinary girl, even though she's really a guardian from eternal life, though? Well, that's kind of complicated. This series itself is more of Monster of the Week trope. Sort of. Yeah, one of the biggest gripes some people seem to have, though, even though I find it hypocritical, is that somehow they always have a problem with these episodic stories. Meanwhile, in the OVA, it was just as episodic there, and somehow this year's series seems to get criticism for that, but not the OVA. Okay, I'm just gonna stop right here and just ask you guys the question. What's even more hypocritical, the fact that they don't explain themselves why one is better over the other, or is it because of the fact that I'm not seeing what they're seeing, though, in themselves, saying that, oh, this is more of a series where you have to watch every episode in order to find the backstory itself, though. I will admit the backstory doesn't come until episode 22, so if anyone who binges through the series like I have, it's probably going to take them a while to do so. Though, thankfully, despite the series being pretty short, though, you don't have to worry about it all in one go, though. I mean, it's definitely not a new thing when it comes to having episodic shows, especially when it comes to Magical Girl, though, but I think the only reason why people compare this year's series to the OVA series is because the OVAs themselves have better stories, and this one has weaker stories by comparison. I'm not so sure about that. They're both technically almost the same level, though, so maybe I am blind to what they're seeing, though. I really wouldn't know it either way, though. Plus, I do like what they make out of Miyu in the first place, though. While she is really seemingly like this ordinary girl, though, she actually really does have some sort of power to her, though. She has the power to teleport, so she can fool the demons whenever she fights them off, though, as choreographic as the series can be at times, though. And there's also the fact that she uses her flames to do so. A vampire using flames. I didn't know vampires could do that, but apparently I'm one of the new students who has to learn something new every day. Huh. But in spite of all of that, though, there are some things that I will say the series does keep my interest. For what it's worth, though, the story is that come into play. Yeah, the Shinma themselves, despite what some people might tell you, though, I think they're actually a lot that's better than you may see, though. While they are a bit outdated, though, I think this could be a product of its time, foreshadowing for later, and I think that could be because they're just really more focused on Japanese lore than it is, though. This isn't really anything surprising, given that the last series I talked about, Holic, actually does go into something like that when it comes to something around this time era, but I get why some people would kind of complain about that. Plus, the Shinra themselves are pretty creative, though. They normally just go after humans, though, but as you can probably guess, though, they're not afraid to go after the other demons either, though, or something along those lines. It's kind of like Princess Mononoke in some cases, where because the series itself is not afraid to go dark, they're not afraid to show anything around Japanese folklore, though. Though that could be because of the power of Hayao Miyazaki, but he didn't really work on Vampire Princess Miyu, at least from the research I've researched on. But like I said, though, Miyu usually just sets them to the other side, though, but she usually uses her flames in order to do that. I'm not so sure about you guys, but while it does get repetitive, though, I kind of like it when she uses her flames, though. And normally she would just use them to say she'll just banish them by having some kind of chant, though. But otherwise, though, it's pretty clever just to see what she can do with her flames, even though, like I said, the choreographic it could have been a lot better with its own flames, though. I know this wasn't a full-on series about how they can do, say, magical girl transformation, although the second to last episode, she only did transformation that took, a few seconds, unlike, say, a longer transformation. But that being said, I still love how they portrayed Miyu, though. While she can be a bit of an aloof at times, though, she does come to play that she does care about others around her, though. Plus, it's actually pretty nice to see an aloof character show their compassionate side, even if he does more of her coldness towards that. But we also can't forget the larva, and okay, just like what the comment said, he's pretty charming himself. Like, I know some people ship both him and Miyu together, but I don't know. I'm not really a shipper person myself, despite being into romance, but I think they're more like, say, they're better off as companions than they are, though. Though, admittedly, I did see some people shipping these two and hoping that they would kiss, but I'm just gonna come out and say it. I think they're better off as companions than they are as lovers. That admittedly maybe because I watched Holic and I think of that, though I really wouldn't put it either way. And let's not forget Sheena. Yeah, I hope that I don't seem like I'm confusing people, but I had to look it up just to make sure that Sheena is this little cute little creature who looks like a lost Wigglypuff character, just with a different set of eyes. No kidding, they're actually of Sheena the made themselves and Shinmu themselves, however, and I have to fully admit he's quite adorable. Like I'm not gonna mince words though. This little guy, despite being all cutesy and everything, we do get to see their other eye, which, yeah, this other eye that they have happens to be a lot more, say, that's how you can tell there's a demon someplace, though, where their eyes are a lot either red or something around bulgy eyes. I'm not so sure how people with bulgy eyes would take that, but you take. Next up, there's also Rhea, and I'm going to be honest, though, despite her being coming off as annoying to some people, though, I kind of like her character. Not just because of how she carries the doll with her, and as well as have a kimono around her. I mean, come on now. Oh, we still have Miyu wearing a kimono, so I don't see what's the difference between that. But I have to say, I kind of like Rhea. Despite not being the series for too much of the time, though, she actually does serve as a good antagonist. I thought at first she would be the big bad of the series, though, this time, though, but no, she turns out to be just that, a sweet girl that has some kind of hatred towards Miyu, although admittedly I can't really say how much you want to hate Miyu, but maybe that's because I like it when the characters go all dynamic on the magical girl heroine. I don't know, but I do admire how much they have that. She doesn't come in until a few episodes in, but if you ever do get to see her, she does give her all, and I really do admire. But you may have noticed how I said that Miyu turns herself into an ordinary girl in order to blend in for the humans. Well, that's because, if you've noticed, though, she does disguise herself as a human to be with these here girls, Sisado, Yukari, and the other girl. I'm not so sure how much these names are pronouncing, but needless to say, though he say Yukari and Chisado are all pretty interesting too, as well. Oh, but I have to stress, though, they don't really bother coming into the series that much. But if you ever do see these characters, they seem to be good friends with me, Yugi, until something happens to Chisado, the one in the front right now. I'm not gonna say anything, but if you ever do watch the series, you're gonna find out the twist of her that's probably expected out of nowhere, despite it could have been a lot more. Yeah, if the show did continue a little further, maybe we would have gotten more into why this year's series could have been more popular, but I digress. I mean, I'll be the first to say that nobody can tell when a series is going to be popular or unpopular. No one can tell you if it came out way before its time or after its time. But that being said, I might as well talk to you guys why a little more about what I decided to cover Vampire Princess Miyu instead of Pupa. I know I said why in the beginning, but here's the reason why. See, this all began when I was just watching YouTube on TV, as you do, and as you can probably guess, I was just trying to browse through whatever I can to watch whatever I can on YouTube on TV. And as what you can probably infer, I was trying to see what I could find just to see what I could find before I went to bed that night. Until when I was watching a certain other series a few months ago. Key the Metal Idol, a series that I started watching around June of this year because I was going through a coping thing, and as well as going through after watching this video, or at least before watching the video with my premiere of Usagi Drop. Though, admittedly, this was during the time when something else happened during the time, which I don't want to go over what happened around June, but needless to say, it was very uncomfortable. Anyways, after this, at that time, though, I was finishing up Key the Metal Idol, where I stumbled upon a show that really caught my interest right away. And as you can probably guess, this is what was popping up in the recommendations this year's series, especially with the opening. When I saw that opening, I immediately got hooked right away. I'm not so sure how many people get hooked up on openings, but if you've seen my video on Pata Lero from last year, my god, saying that out loud makes me feel old, doesn't it? Anyways, if you know anything about me in general, then you already know that whatever music catches my mind right away, you bet that I'm gonna probably be watching it. And when I first heard that opening, and after going to bed just to go upstairs for the night, yeah, I watched YouTube on my TV. Hence, I don't really have a TV upstairs in my room, so I watched it in the living room. And right when I was watching it, the imagery, the music, and everything else really grabbed my attention right away. There's a reason why I wanted to talk about this year's series in its own self. But even with that said, however, that's the other reason why I decided to cover this show in particular. Mostly because, well, considering it was vampire related, and what's more, since it is October as of now, I figured I might as well talk about this here series in itself. Because why should I put it off though? I originally wanted to talk about this series next year, but considering it was 26 episodes long and it got my interest right away, I figured I might as well talk about this year's series, considering that what's the point of going over a series that I don't need to talk about that's already been talked about to death. Yeah, this series has been talked about before, but it doesn't really help my case that they don't really talk about it further along down those lines, in spite of that though. To say nothing else though, it felt like this was made for me, and watching Vampire Princess Miyu, then I would recommend watching on YouTube, but we're not done yet. See, I already talked about the characters and all that other stuff, but nevertheless, I'm probably going to have to talk about what else I thought about it. I might as well talk about some of the gripes I've had with this series. Aside from people saying that, oh, the anime is a lot weaker than the OVAs, but let's talk about one thing that kind of bothers me. It's not the main issue, but it is one thing that bothers me, especially when it comes to storytelling. Mainly the pace. Now, I wouldn't call the pacing bad necessarily. It's definitely not atrocious or anything. Far from it. But I think it may be a product of its time. See, this was during the time when the pacing itself felt like one of those stories. You know the kind, where they slowly have to drag on some scenes here and there, or they have more exposition and say, instead of show don't tell, they're just gonna tell us instead of showing what happened every now and then. I'm gonna say this right here and now, there are times where they'll dip into flashback or something like that, but it's only rarely they do it. And I'm not gonna lie, it can hurt a series though. Now, I'm not gonna fault the writers for that though, considering that there are times where the series can dip into something like that, but I think it's only because this was during a different time period. And like I said in the beginning of the video, there's no way in hell we can tell what kind of time period we're supposed to be expecting things, and what's more, we can't expect to tell ourselves what's supposed to come out ahead of the time or before the time. So if you complain about that, I can't really say much about it though, especially when it comes to this much. But by far the one thing that I wanted to, and this is just a me problem though, but I think it has to do with another thing. Aside from the pacing, which it was a product during its time period, I'm not gonna lie, I think I have to talk about its sub and the dub. So let's go over it, shall we? Yeah, this is one of those anime where, despite to what people might tell you, even if they do have some well-known voice actors, including Steve Bloom himself, but I'm sorry, this is kind of a crime in itself, though. But how the hell can you screw up a dub with something in the likes of Steve Bloom or something like Wendy Lee? The reason I'm saying this to you is because, yeah, as much as I enjoy dubs here and there, though, like the last Magical Girls show I talked about with Wedding Peach, this is not a good one. Though, admittedly, they do have some voice actors that you may be familiar with, unlike that series. It's not the worst dub out there, but the problem I have with this here dub has to do with their performances. The actors are doing whatever they can, but if I had to fault someone here, it would have to be the direction of the show, because my god, it feels like the actors came on set one day and realized that they're either drunk on set or they just don't give two shits about it. Or if you want a better example, you know those abridged anime series that they come across on YouTube that you see every so often, where actors, or in this case, amateur people online, just gonna go ahead and paste whatever they could out of their own series just to make it seem much funnier. Yeah, that's what they did with this series. I think the worst who got out of it the most would have to be Miyu's voice actress. I know it's a common thing for women to voice these girl characters, especially ones that are ranging from both kids to teenagers and sometimes adults, and they can make their pitch as much as they can. But the way the voice actress plays her sounds like she's a little girl rather than a teenager. In the sub, you can definitely tell that while she does have a teenager voice, though, she sounded much more of an aloof, but still had that charm to her, and she still cracked emotion whenever she had the chance to anytime sooner. And it doesn't help the case that they really did this dirty on here. I'm not faulting the actors, just the direction, if anything to judge by. But in spite of all of that, when it comes right down to it, while I can't really spoil the ending for you because I want to see for you guys, if you want to see for yourself, you can watch this series for yourself when it comes to making it online. Yeah, the series itself is available both in English and Japanese online on YouTube, so you don't have anything to worry about. Though, admittedly, I had to go through a piracy website, sadly, because somehow the series itself made me want to start all over again, since I had to erase my history all over again. Thanks for this stupid AI bullshit. And no, I'm not over that if you couldn't already tell. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Vampire Princess Miyu is a good series. I wouldn't call it a great series, but there were some things that could be a little. Maybe it's because this is one of those series that seems like it came out way before its time period or something, but I feel like even if you take that away, you're still going to be left with a pretty nice series overall, just to see what it's like. And I would be. Damn, this year show really feels like it could have been a cult classic, even if it does have a small yet dedicated fan. In fact, do you know what we don't really see that often when it comes to magical girl shows? A vampire theme. Yeah, this would be right up there with the goth girls if they want to see some magical girl in the gothic. And I'm not talking about a series like Monster High, Growing Up Creepy, Ruby Gloom, Edgar and Ellen, or Mona the Vampire, just to name a. I meant like a magical girl series that has vampires. I mean, seriously, if something like, say, vampires or any kind of ghoul monster got their limbo, though, then and this would be pretty much right up their alley, if nothing else, though. I mean, if this series, along with any other show out there, could be doing so, then there would be so much more gothic stuff. Don't get me wrong, there are some stuff like witches and the like, though, but those have been done so many times, though. Not to say you can't do anything with witches no more. You can still reinvent them in your own creative way if you see my Star Giant campaign and reaction video. But what I'm saying is that it would be nice to see vampires into a magical girl setting. That sounds like something that would be nice on paper. And on the surface level, it seems like you can come up with your own ideas. But I get why some people would find that boring, but let me offer the alternative. If you say that's boring, then how come witches aren't boring since they've been done to death already? I guess what I'm trying to say is that whether you like Vampire Princess Miyu is pretty subjective, but if you want to see this series for yourself, like I said, it's on YouTube, both the English sub and the English dub, so you can pretty much have nothing to lose. And if that's really all you want, then I recommend watching it around the Halloween era. I wouldn't say it's the scariest show out there, but it's definitely enough to ease your attention if you want to see more of a series that goes in Monster of the Week tropes. And let me just ask you the question. If you really can't stand Monster of the Week shows, then I'm really surprised how you managed to watch something like Scooby Doo. And that show in itself did a lot of Monster of the Week shows, unless you count the later ones like Mystery Incorporated and Velma, but we don't talk about Velma for obvious reasons. But for Mystery Incorporated, yeah, I would recommend that though. Now, with that said, I think that just about does it. And next week, however, oh my goodness. Be sure to look out for my live stream because, yeah, it's that time already. So I'll see you on Tuesday as we go into my live stream for my birthday. But until then, I thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time. And as always, stay flamingo-tastic. I'll see you all around.